This video is brought to you by our amazing supporters over at Patreon. Hey everyone, it's Ben from Board to Bits, and in this video we're going to be setting up the first scene outside of our game, which is our main menu. Now, this video is going to be based on the work we did in the previous video about the Scene Manager class, so you will need to watch that video if you haven't already to kind of get up to speed on this one. We are going to be using the Play Session Manager script that we created from that one. So let's dive right in here. First thing we're going to do is we're going to create a new scene, and we're going to call this main menu. And I'm going to open that up. And in here, camera will need directional light. We don't really need because we're just going to be using some UI elements in here, so we can delete that. And I'm going to right click and create a UI text field. And then clicking on that, I'm going to make this 2D, and I'm going to focus on that, and so that way we kind of see where that's appearing. Not really where we want it to be, so I'm going to quickly just move this up into the center. Because it's anchored at the center, if you get your position X to 0, you'll have it centered in the screen. We'll center the text. This is all really just kind of aesthetic stuff. So if you're not following this directly, that is fine. And I'm just going to call this simple game, make the text white. You see that's pretty visible there. Make the text a little bit bigger. We'll go like 36, and we'll bold it, why not? I am going to quickly change on the camera from the skybox background, which is a little bit, got a lot of gradients and stuff going on there. We're just going to make this the solid color. And we can kind of change this to whatever we want. I'll make it kind of like a aqua or teal color. Okay, in addition to the text, which is the title, and I'll quickly rename that to title, we're also going to add to our canvas here, we're going to add a UI element of a button. And this button, as we can see here, is just named button right now. We're going to actually change the label of that to start game. And this will be the first of a series of buttons we'll eventually have in the main menu, but for right now we're just going to start with the ability to click on this button, get over to our game scene, and start the game. So we'll quickly rename this as well. We'll call this Start Button. Nice and obvious name, makes it easy to look at later and know what we're doing. And we'll save that. Now this is really technically all we need in terms of actual in terms of the UI structure. I am going to add one other thing to this scene, which is in our prefabs. I'm going to add the Play Session Manager we created in the last video, the prefab of that, to this scene as well. So now, no matter where we start, whether we start playing in the game scene or in this scene here, we always have a Play Session Manager that's starting with us and moving along with us. Now what we're eventually going to have is that the Start button, when we click on it, we are going to want something to happen, and we're going to use that using what are called Unity events, which are these kind of in-inspector events here. They're kind of like the events that we create in C# scripts, but these are really kind of customized to the UI elements, in this case on click, so whenever the button is clicked, something will happen. We'll click this plus sign down here, which gives us our first event to listen for, or sorry, our first object to tell that the event has happened, rather. This object is actually listening for the event. So the object that's going to listen for that is actually the canvas itself. And I'm going to rename this as well. I'm going to call this main menu UI. Go back to that button, and I'm going to drag that in here. And what that does is this gives us access to all of the components on that element, and we're going to be able to give it a function to say, hey, when the button gets clicked, this function should, or this method should be called. Now we don't actually have the method yet because we don't have any custom scripts on here, so we're going to add one to our assets. So we're going to go into scripts, and we'll create a main menu folder, and inside of there I'm going to create a main menu UI script. I'm going to open this up in MonoDevelop. We'll zoom in a little bit here. Should be good. And we don't need start or update. And we don't actually right now, a lot of times when you're making a script for UI, you have to use the Unity engine.ui library. We don't need that though right now because the inspector is really handling all of that communication for us. All we need in here is a public void method, and I'm going to call this start button pressed. Not going to put anything in here yet, but what this is going to do is this is going to call the game scene. So we'll note what we want it to do. But now what we can do, now that we have this public void method here, public meaning that it can be accessed from outside, including in the inspector, and it has to return, I believe it has to return void. That might not be the case, but it's helpful if it can, because obviously this isn't going to be returning anything to the inspector itself. But now what can happen is we can go to our main menu UI, we can add the main menu UI component, so that now in the button in our event here, the main menu UI now has that component on it, and we can call start button pressed. So click on that, add that there, and now we have that method. So when the button is clicked, it will tell the main menu UI that in its component in this script here, we should call this method. Now, in order to call the next scene up, we need to use the scene management database, or the scene management library. So what we're going to do is we're going to say Unity Engine dot scene management dot scene manager dot load scene. And what we're doing here, we could put this all up into here and say using all of that. I'm just doing it down here for right now because it's a little bit quicker and it's the only time we're calling anything from this particular library. So we're just going to leave that there for now. And then I'm going to say load scene, and we can do this via a string name or an integer of the build scene, or the scene build index. And I'll explain what that means in 1 second, but we're just going to use the scene name for right now. If we go back here, we see that the scene name that we're going to load is level. So we simply have to type in here level. And that's really all it takes. Because we have that play session manager that's going to come with us and tell the level that it should load itself, this is all we need to do. We just need to tell the scene manager, switch scenes, and then the play session manager will handle the rest for us. So we can save that. Now there's one more thing we need to do. If we were to try to do this right now, in fact, I can actually hit play and do this, and I hit the start button, you notice that nothing happens and we get an error down here. It's a little bit difficult to read the red on the gray, but if we pull back here, scene level couldn't be loaded because it has not been added to the build settings. So what we have to do is go up to build settings, and here is where that was talking about when I showed that integer option where you could say scenes in build. This is where that would it would get that information from. So what we do is we're going to go over to project, and I'm going to first add the main menu scene here. I'm going to drag that into here. So that's now index 0. So if we ever said load scene with a 0, it would load the main menu. Likewise, I'm going to put in level. That's now integer or index 1. So load scene 1 would load level. But we can also use their names if we know them and we know. This can be, I find that's a little bit useful to use names in certain situations because you don't have to remember exactly what order stuff is in. On the flip side, though, if you do have stuff in a very specific order, it can be useful to be able to just say things like load this scene +1 to like go to the next scene, things like that. So with all that, we don't actually have to save anything. We're not going to build or run anything yet. I'm going to close this, but now what we'll see, and let me turn off maximize on play here. We don't need all that screen real estate, but we see we have our simple game, start game. We click start game, and we go right to our game. And sure enough, we are still able to move around, able to go to the goal. The goal and the player start in the right positions, as does the obstacles. So now we have our game still working, but it's now in this context of this program where we can start our game and eventually do other things too. But this is the first step in getting, like I say, building the stuff around your game that is not your game, but that makes your game an accessible program for others to use. So thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.